Corsair Cove starts off simple enough, but then things start to get tougher. For example, you go from having tier 2 plus ships, which are awesome, to tier 3s, which suck if you use them wrong. And you go from all your pirates being perfectly happy with some stew and booze, to each of them demanding different complex resources, each of which need their own supply chains. And so, in today's video, I'm going to go over some tips, tricks, and mistakes to avoid that I picked up in about 50 hours of Corsair Cove with half a dozen wins. Before we get into it though, if you think the game looks cool and you don't own it yet, you can use my Nexus link down below to buy the game, and you'll be supporting the channel when you do. Tip 1. All hands on deck. This is a buff that gives you plus 50% production in exchange for using double the workers. And yes, if a building has resource inputs, it does increase the input requirements by 50% as well. This is a good way to fill temporary gaps in your production. For example, I expanded my colony with a few too many jobs here, which left me with an upkeep cost of around 70 stew a minute. So to keep that drain steady, all hands on deck fills in. Now later on, even if you have plenty of employees, all hands on deck is still useful. This is a leaf cutter, which is attached to a fiber deposit. It only has a certain amount of fiber. Once that runs out, well, then it's going to work at 50% capacity. So using all hands on deck to boost the production after it runs out is a good way to help restore efficiency. Another example could be just running out of space. If I build more buildings here, I might not have another place in the fertile ground to put something down. So my only option would be to use all hands on deck to boost up my existing production. You can also use the tier 3 building in the notoriety tree, the Entertainer's Guild Hall. This changes the boost from 50% to 80%, so an additional 30% increase, meaning it's almost as efficient as building a second building of the same type. Here's the cool thing though, that extra 30% does not require more input resources, making this free production. Also, if you're finding this helpful or want to know more about what the best ships are, get subscribed. I'm going to be coming out with a video on that in the very near future. Oh, and leave a like while you're down there because it really helps out with the YouTube algorithm. Now, on to the next tip. Tip number 2, don't forget to upgrade the stew. Remember how in the last tip I said I expanded my colony with too many drifters too quickly and I've had to fill in on my stew production with all hands on deck? There's a better way to deal with that. Instead of relying on the campfire that has a base production of 16, what I can do is swap over to a Buccaneer grill. This has a base production of 35. Though it does require pigs as an input. The Buccaneer grill uses 2 pigs per minute, the pig herder produces 4, and so if I use all hands on deck on the pig herder, I can fuel 3 Buccaneer's grills and produce over 100 stew a minute. That should solve my problem in no time. Then when they're done building, I can connect them all over to my galley using the middle building to minimize travel distance. Gotta keep those routes efficient. Without any additional production boost from all hands on deck, they're producing 35 stew each, for a total of 105, which is quite a bit higher than the roughly 70 that these 3 were producing combined. And I now have a far more efficient production line at the small cost of a single pig herder. The reason I'm using all hands on deck here, I needed 6 pigs. If I needed 8 pigs, I'd simply build a second one, because for now, I have plenty of room. Another way that you can upgrade the stew production is in the tier 2 Fireside Feast node in the notoriety tree. This gives up to plus 15 production to the campfire, making it more or less as efficient as a baseline Buccaneer grill. I say baseline, of course, because yes, you can enhance the Buccaneer grill as well with Stew Surge. That gives a whopping 25, meaning that yes, a fully upgraded Buccaneer grill is vastly more efficient. But as you keep playing, don't forget to upgrade your stew production. In some cases, you may also need to upgrade booze if you have a lot of swabbies, but it really is stew that I often find myself running out of. Tip 3, centralized warehouses. For example, I have a warehouse here that does far more than simply collect resources. It's connected directly to my salter. So all the salt goes from here up to here. Then each of my cassava ovens draw from the warehouse. This is great because I can make the warehouse into part of a network. If I'm using more salt than one saltern can supply, well, if I'm connected directly to a saltern, I'm going to have some shortages. On the other hand, if I do it via a warehouse, I could connect this saltern over here to my warehouse network, then have all of my cassava ovens draw directly from here, so no loss of efficiency. Similarly, I'm using it to store some cassava bread, never know when you'll need it, and in the meantime, can sell it for some coin. And last but not least, I'm collecting rope. In this case, I'm using it more as a pass-through to get it somewhere else, though. And all of this works because the warehouse is at a centralized location. If I put it directly near the saltern, it would be perfect for taking ingredients from the saltern and giving it to the cassava ovens, but it couldn't function for distributing rope, and it might not be the ideal place to store the cassava bread if I wanted to ship it elsewhere. Similarly, if I put it far away, it would be pretty good for transporting goods to another location, but not nearly so good at storing something for local production. This is why I will often place down a warehouse first and then build other things around it. But when it comes to placing warehouses and creating supply networks, it's important to remember that just because you can doesn't mean you always should. Sometimes it is just easier to build a second production building at the new location. Let's go over a quick example of that. My initial wood production is here in my woodcutter, but once I started to produce barrels at a cooper, I needed wood over here. Now in theory, what I could do is send the wood from here up to this warehouse, or maybe since that warehouse is full, up to a warehouse here, then to a second warehouse here, then to the third warehouse here, and then over to my cooper. But I have plenty of space, so I might as well just build a second woodcutter and call it good. This also allows me to power a char burner, meaning I've diversified my industry. And so those are some examples of both how warehouses can be great, and you can use them to create a supply network that spans your entire island, and also a situation where you might not want to do that because it's easier to just build a production building elsewhere. Tip 5. Build your principles. Principal buildings, unlocked through the compass, can give you a huge boost. For example, there's the trading post, where you can stockpile resources and sell them for coin. This costs 100 gold, which is pretty costly, but every time you make a sale, you're getting free money, more or less. At least if you're using excess renewable resources, things like stew, planks, etc., turning manpower into money. I'd be a little bit more hesitant to sell things like stone and the stone blocks produced, or black powder, though it should be noted that these things are often more lucrative than their renewable counterparts. But here's the cool part. Let's say I am done using this trading post. I could just delete it, ideally after selling stuff off so no resources are lost, and I'd get a full refund. I'm not spending 100 coins to make more money. I'm just loaning the building 100 coins, and I can reclaim that later. A couple more useful buildings include the Shrine of the Sea. This is unlocked through the Seafaring Tree, and it buffs all of your ships with sea legs. Don't underestimate this sea legs buff. It's powerful enough that you can use a tier 2 or tier 2 plus ship to take on a tier 3 mission, provided you fully stack it. But more about that in an upcoming video where I talk about ships, captains, and combat. And then there's the salvage dock. You can construct as many of these as you want, and each one reduces the cost to construct and repair ships by 20%. Though, as a note, that 20% is multiplicative, not additive. So I built one, that takes the cost from 100% to 80%. So then I built another one, which takes it from 80% to about 65%. It's not additive, so it doesn't go to 60. If I were to build a third, it would go down by another multiplicative 20%, ultimately landing around 50% of the original. There are plenty of other cool buildings which you can unlock. Banners, which increase maximum cohesion. Houses, which are far, far, far more efficient than tents. Some of my favorites here include the Entertainer's Guild Hall, mentioned in another tip. The Spy Nest, which increases range on pirate camps, very helpful. The Crow's Nest, think of it like the trader, it's passive income as you explore. The Well, which is particularly good in Uncharted mode as it reduces negative global effects from random events. And for a cool upgraded version of the Salvage Yard, the Shipwright's Guild Hall. In addition, there are some very powerful late-game buildings unlocked when you reach Tier 5. This includes the Golden Palace, so all resource deposits never expire. The Ocean Coliseum, you can resurrect crew lost at sea, at least provided the ship itself isn't lost. The Military Fortress that single-handedly handles your defense. and the Great Lighthouse, which is insane because crew upkeep is one of the biggest expenses late game, and this just cuts it by 50%. Yeah, all of these buildings are great. Keep an eye out for them as you advance your principles. Tip number 5, place pirate camps carefully. There's a few factors you have to consider here. The first is physical location. Is it in the way of anything? i.e., if I put it up here, it's right in the middle of fertile ground. Might be fine if I don't need it. Bit of a problem if I do. Second, as you can see bottom right, depending on where the camp is placed, different deposits, and even features like, say, a pier slot, are in or out of range. So let's say I want to expand my camp, and I specifically want to build a tier 3 ship that's going to require turtle soup. I need a source of water, I need a source of turtles, and maybe I need a pier slot to build that ship at. This is going to be an excellent location because it has all of those things. It does, however, open up a new attack point for my settlement. More about that in just a minute. What this doesn't have is access to birds. So if I instead needed some advanced processing, I might have to place the pirate camp over here, or possibly make 2 different camps, one with a pier slot and one with a bird. Then I build a transportation network, like outlined earlier, to get the resources where I need them. While pirate camp placement is important, it's not the be-all end-all. Don't obsess over it and spend 10 minutes placing your camp, because ultimately, if you don't like the location, you can move it. It's a little bit of a pain, but it's doable. Also, in a lot of cases, like later on, maybe I do need the birds. Well, I'll just put another pirate camp down right about here. This has birds, salt, a couple other useful resources. You know what? I might even put it over here so it also gets the copper in range. Of course, after placing a new pirate camp, the next thing you do is connect it over to your main settlement. The other thing to always do is set up a galley. Otherwise, it's immediately going to go into unrest because you'll have workers and no way to feed them. The next thing that I like to do is start putting down housing, because the more jobs that I have, the more housing I'm going to need. And specifically in the case of housing, it can form a lot of unnecessary connections, like this. Why does it need to connect to the other buildings? So I just like to hold down Control, which allows me to place buildings without auto-generating connections. And I can then make minimal connections only where needed instead of spamming my colony with a ton of bridges that are just going to get in the way. But this actually brings me to a mistake that I made with a lot of my early cities. That is, every time I'd set up a new pirate camp, new vulnerabilities would open. And the game has this really angry, broken shield symbol. Oh, it's not protected. Be careful. Your island could be attacked. And so what I'd do is immediately build a gun tower, and another gun tower, and another gun tower. And in some cases, I would even double up on gun towers because I was worried about being attacked, and so more gun towers, more defense. But here's the problem. As I expanded out, more and more and more locations opened up. For example, I'm now being attacked in this brand new coastal area where I have no defense. The enemy ship has a health value of 1, so a single gun tower would be fine. But here's the thing. I don't need to do any of that, because instead, I can build a destroyer. This is the red ship class, which you're probably going to want one of anyway. And you can instead use the destroyer to intercept incoming crown attacks. Therefore, you don't need defensive structures at all. So let's take a look at how that combat will go. Because I'm using a destroyer, I have high gun damage and high armor. My armor is very helpful for defensive bonuses. As you can see, I am preventing 32 to 35 damage using heavy fire, which is more than the crown can possibly deal. As part of this, my returning fire is also quite high. This is based on my gun damage. So, first shot, almost sank them. They're again dealing some damage. Just for the sake of things, I'm going to prevent it, a purely defensive action. Since they're taking a non-offensive action here, it's time to go all out with point-blank barrage, which would more or less sink the ship from full. So yeah, if you have a destroyer, you can easily take out crown patrols without a single defensive building. Tip 7. Treat crew and cohesion as currencies to spend. If you're playing in Uncharted mode, you'll often see events like this, Battered Refugees, which allows you to take on new drifters in exchange for losing some cohesion. Typically, it'll give you options ranging from taking on a lot of drifters for a big hit to cohesion, to taking on only a couple or turning them away entirely. Now, cohesion is a bit of a health bar. If it reaches 0, you'll lose the game. However, you can get cohesion pretty easily, especially in the early game, when all you need to do is complete any of these story events. You'll get a flat 20. You can also get more by exploring a new region. A lot of these repeatable events give you a small amount of cohesion, and quest events, especially those with multiple steps, tend to give you more. Last up, if you're in a pinch for cohesion, unlock the gibbet building in the Empire tree. Use it to lock a pirate up, instant cohesion. Now, in the early game, you should be a little bit more careful about losing drifters. That doesn't mean you can't sacrifice a few for the greater good. Because if I go to this event, I can get 80 more drifters. There's also a replayable event over in Buccaneer's End with the Bloody Bastille that you can interact with once an hour to get a large number of drifters. With that said, if a ship loses all 20 of its crew, then the ship is lost. So you do need to be a little bit careful not to take massive losses. You'll also need to use drifters to replace your crew when you head back to port. So, much like a health bar in Magic the Gathering, you don't want your cohesion, ship health, or ship crew to drop to 0, but as long as you have 1, you're totally fine. Tip 8. Ziplines rock. Initially, rope ladders and bridges are totally fine. But you're going to get to a point where your supply chains are more complex, and you need to transport goods from one area to another. Or your warehouse is just a little bit out of range of your producer. And so for situations like this, you need to get a bit more creative. For example, this route here is yellow, and I don't want it to be yellow. So I could try to make the route a little bit more direct. Let's say I go here, and I attach the bridge. Oh, doesn't reach. Well, no problem. I could just use an aerial lift. Ah, still too long, and also very expensive. While an aerial lift is an incredibly efficient method of transportation, each one costs 300 coins. Instead, I'm going to use the humble zipline that only costs 10. It's very good for downhill transportation. So now I can get from here all the way over to here instantaneously. Except the pirate's going to need to make a return trip, so I need a second zipline, which I'll attach like so. Now I can quickly and easily transport anything I need from here, and then they go back, and so on and so forth, with the main travel distance being up the building itself. Coming over here, there's a similarly inefficient supply line. Let's see if I can do something somewhat similar. So maybe I'll start here, and I'll go all the way over directly to the warehouse. So cool. I'm now taking goods directly to the warehouse. But I still have to go all the way up and back. Well, no problem. I'll just build a second zip line. Now, it might be a little bit ambitious to run the zip line from a high point here all the way up here, since this is already on a cliff. But I'm going to guess if I can get it over to here, that's probably going to be fine. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start by creating a mast. This adds an artificial human-constructed high point. Then I'm going to put a zip line on it, and I'm going to put it right on this bridge connector here. And there we go. The path is now green. And I also don't need this connection, because anyone going from here over to here should be able to do it easily enough with a second zip line, like so. You can use zip lines to cross long distances with ease and speed up your transportation to make sure all of these routes are efficient. If you can get every transit route in your city green, you're doing great. Tip number 9, fully crew your ships before setting sail. At this point, I'll build a shiny new ship like this Tier 4 destroyer. Absolutely smashes stuff, has amazing stats. And then I will send it out to sea without properly crewing it. The thing about that is, a ship's stats are determined in part by its crew. So, if I send it out to sea without anything but swabbies, it will have much lower stats than if I, at the very least, crew it up with bombardiers, but ideally I should add buccaneers as well. The buccaneers don't necessarily add that much to the gun damage, that's primarily on the bombardiers, but they do add a massive amount of defense. And most of the events where you're going to be using a destroyer are in fact relying on both gun damage and defense relatively equally. So now that I've fully crewed the ship up, I'm going to be in a much better spot. If you want to know how well a ship performs with and without a proper crew, click on any of your resources, and then go to the Ships tab in Overviews. So for example, the Ravager that I built has 33 base gun damage. The reason it's so much higher is because it was fully crewed with bombardiers and captained by Teach, who further boosts gun damage. Similarly for something like the Warlord. It has 52 gun damage as a tier 5 ship. Now, if I were to crew it with swabbies and send it out to sea, it would have 52 gun damage. Meanwhile, my fully crewed Ravager would have 66, meaning its actual performance in combat would be better than a tier 5 equivalent. Of course, once the tier 5 is fully crewed up, it's going to significantly outperform the tier 4, so on and so forth. Tip 10. For most objectives, stats matter more than dice rolls. So I'm going to send my tier 4 Ravager into this story event that requires 62 gun damage, 10 speed and maneuverability, and 62 armor. I have more than enough stats, so you'll see how this plays out and how each of the stats influence the actions I take and how successful they are. So the first goal is Traverse, which relies on ship maneuverability and armor. There's a hostile action of Crew Overboard, so I'll probably want to do either Hold Fast or Keep Her True. But first, let's look at the different ways to gain distance and see how different stats influence each. First, there's Press Her Hard. The distance gain scales off of armor, making this a very effective way to gain distance on a destroyer. But the damage prevented scales off of maneuverability. So a Prowler would actually be much better at preventing damage with the same card. Ease the Helm gains distance based on maneuverability, i.e., good for Prowlers. Those are the green ships. The damage prevented to supplies, that's just a dice roll. So yeah, despite how much the game emphasizes dice rolls in its early tutorials, they aren't all that important compared to the underlying stats, especially once you get up into the tier 3, 4, 5, and 6 ships. Similarly, Ride the Swell is based on speed, so a hunter would gain a lot of distance here. Keep Her True is also scaled on speed. Since I have 36, it remains a decent option even if speed isn't the best, and that is what I'm going to be using as I want to prevent that damage to crew. Remember, the ship's stats increase, roughly doubling when fully crewed, so if you lose crew, your stats drop, and that could put you into a failure spiral. Though occasionally, missing a stat can be a bonus, like when you're taking damage to supplies based on distance traveled. So, as you can see, your ship's stats matter a lot when it comes to taking different actions. Unfortunately, there are some events, like Parlay, where all of a sudden it doesn't matter at all. This is all based on dice rolls. Everything that I'm going to be doing and everything my opponent's going to be doing. So, when my opponent tries to gain more dice, I'm going to gain as much advantage as possible to mitigate potential losses. Then, when they try to punish me, lowering my advantage, I'm going to prevent that loss and gain more dice. This way I can set myself up for a win on another turn. Here, 40 to 65, it's a little bit of a gamble. I could play it safe by using something like Leverage to gain treasure, or Conviction to gain dice next turn. Or I could try to gamble, because on average, I should roll high enough with Silver Tongue to complete the event, which I did. Next up, Investigate. This is another dice roll influenced event, followed by Defend, which is primarily armor and maneuverability. So let's jump ahead to the Shoot objective. Alright, shooting is about direct combat, reducing enemy health, meaning it primarily scales off of gun damage. And what do destroyers excel at? Gun damage. What does Teach boost? Gun damage. Hence, I have 80 gun damage, which is going to make my attacks very effective. In fact, because the crab decided to increase its action pool for next turn instead of mitigating something, I could end the event in a single point-blank barrage. But to keep things interesting, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to select Easiest Murder. That way a couple more actions get to play out, i.e. it uses Claw Swipe. This is dealing damage based on its gun damage, which thankfully is quite low. So what I want to do is prevent that damage, which thanks to my high armor is going to be very easy. Alternatively, if it's going to take a whole bunch of damage, sometimes it's better to just attack. I have 282 health. I will take at most 42. I'm going to easily win this with a single point-blank barrage. I could keep playing defensive, but I might run out of resources, which could result in more losses than if I take a little damage now to conclude the event. Tip 11, plunder that booty. Because treasure is a relevant stat to combat. Some of your actions, such as daring scouts here, can give you treasure as a reward. Usually, this means taking a bit of damage, either to supplies, crew, or in this case, both. So it's not always going to be your go-to action. But when you have time, you should definitely invest in it. Not only are treasure actions often an efficient way to complete objectives, let's say you run out of supplies. Well, the support actions include sacrificing health and crew, sacrificing just health, sacrificing just crew, or sacrificing treasure, which provides you with a way to recoup some of your losses in combat without lowering your ship's stats. Additionally, treasure gives both supplies and coins at the end of a run, and coins are a valuable resource. So here, for example, the enemy is not taking any particularly hostile action, so I could just very happily farm myself a windfall, increasing my treasure, which as you can see, I will now gain 34 coin and 3 supplies at the end of combat. Now we're trying to deal damage, so I could prevent damage with dodge and weave, but I have plenty of supplies, so I'm just going to use loot carriers. I prevent the damage, and I gain more supplies. Then I do it again, and now it's probably about time where I should end the event. While plundering for treasure is valuable, only to a point, because you can only carry so much of it. So I'm going to use Bloody Clash and move on to the next portion, where again, I have to gather some hints, and I can use this as an opportunity to maybe grab myself a little bit more treasure before everything wraps up. And so, in addition to the regular rewards that I get for completing the event, I also got some supplies back, which helps me do more events without having to stop at a friendly port, and some coins which I can use for various principal buildings. Last but not least, use crow's nests to get lots of free coins. This is normally a fairly rare raid good, though you can accumulate treasure within your runs to get some as well. But if you haven't been to a region in a while, it becomes shrouded in fog, like this. You need to send a ship to explore it and reveal the region. And that is where a principal building, the crow's nest, comes in. For every discovery event that you send a ship to, you gain 20 coins. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 crow's nests, meaning that I get 140 coins every time I reveal one of these regions on the map. I've got a ship here, I'm sending it to the Golden City. And there we go, plus 140 coins. After a little bit, this will become shrouded in fog again, so I'll be able to send yet another ship and gain even more coins. This is why it really pays to build crow's nests, because after 5 reveals, they've paid for their own cost, and you can just keep building them and keep profiting. And so that is 12 tips, tricks, and mistakes to avoid that you can use to master Corsair Cove. That said, while I do have a considerable amount of time in the game, and I've won quite a few matches, I don't know everything there is to know. So, if you're an expert, leave some of your pro tips and tricks down below. On the other hand, if you're a new player looking for more information, ask your questions. There's a good chance that you'll either get an answer from myself or someone else in the community, or you might even see your question answered in a future video. So after you make a comment, do be sure to get subscribed and ring that notification bell to see all future uploads. I also think I'm going to try a run where I crank all the difficulties up to max. Is it winnable? Is it reasonable? No idea. The answer is probably not, but hey, it's going to be fun to try. Oh, and speaking of other fun things, if you want to know more about getting started in Corsair Cove, then do check out my complete beginner's guide. That'll be linked up in the card and down below. One of the things that caught me by surprise with this game, when I played the demo, it was very much about the city building. It was quite challenging and reminded me a bit of Frostpunk. However, the more I've played, the more I've realized the city building is the easier of the two gameplay loops. Because if you set everything up correctly the first time, it kinda just works. And due to the way the satisfaction system interacts with pirates, there's a fair bit of leeway in your supply chain where if you're missing a good for a little bit, no punishment. If you're missing a good for a long time, that's going to be a problem. So I had a blast exploring the world and having high sea adventures. But I'm going to get going for now. So thank you very much for watching to the end. I'm glad you've enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.